This is the pool area that Brian and Lynette Hooker came to visit at about 4:30 in the afternoon on Saturday, April the 4th. Tell me about the day that that couple came in here. What did you see?
Saturday afternoon, I guess around 4:30, roughly. The gentleman came to the bar. His wife went straight down by the pool. The gentleman came up. He got two rum and cokes, Cuba Libres.
There is a photograph of Lynette Hooker standing on the deck of a sailboat. The water behind her is the kind of blue that does not look real in photographs, but is completely real when you are standing in it. The sky is open. The light is the particular gold of late afternoon in the tropics. And Lynette is smiling the way people smile when they are exactly where they want to be. She was not posing for a brand. She was not performing contentment for an audience. She was a woman who had made a specific and deliberate choice about how to spend the years she had, and that choice was the ocean. And the photograph shows what that choice looked like from the outside. It looked like joy. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She grew up in Onstead, Michigan, small town, about 70 miles southwest of Detroit. The kind of place where people know each other's names and the pace of life is set by the seasons and the water. And there was water, lakes, boats, the particular rhythm of a childhood spent near the shoreline. Her mother, Darlene Hamlet, told the Associated Press directly. Lynette had been around lakes, boats, sailing, and swimming her entire life. This was not something she came to late. This was not a retirement hobby that filled the space left by a career. This was who she had always been. She was a good swimmer. She was fit. She was strong. Her daughter, Carly Ellsworth, told CBS News something that has stayed in the public record and that deserves to be heard clearly. She said, "My mom is very fit and strong. She's a good swimmer. She can't just have fallen off the boat." Hold that for a moment. We will come back to it. For over a decade, Lynette and her husband Brian documented their life at sea under the name the Sailing Hookers. They sold everything: the house, the stability, the ordinary architecture of a life lived on land. They bought a 55-foot sailboat, and they named it Soulmate, and they went to sea. What they posted from that boat was not extraordinary in its content. It was extraordinary in its consistency. Sea turtles photographed from the bow, sunsets over open water, cinnamon rolls baked in a solar oven on the deck. The small rituals of two people who had figured out exactly where they belonged and had the discipline and the courage to actually go there. The Sailing Hookers had a following. People who watched from their desks and their living rooms in their ordinary lives and found something in Lynette and Brian's footage that felt like a proof of concept, that it was possible, that you could do it, that the water was real and the light was real and the life was real. Lynette posted to Instagram on April 4th, 2026. The caption said, "Not going anywhere for a while." She was talking about the anchorage. She was talking about the beauty of where they were. She was talking about Elbow Cay in the Bahamas and the particular quality of that light and that water and that stillness. She had no idea what that caption would come to mean. She had no idea it would be the last thing she ever posted. On the evening of April 4th, 2026, Lynette and Brian Hooker arrived at the Abaco Inn on Elbow Cay. The Soulmate was anchored nearby. They came ashore for the evening. It was a Saturday. The bar was busy. The pool was open. The light was doing what the light does at the end of a warm day in the Bahamas. Lynette went to the pool. Brian went to the bar. And somewhere between those two ordinary things, a woman at a poolside bar on a Saturday evening in the islands, and the moment that same woman entered the water and did not come back, something happened. Something that a bartender named Ken, a rescue volunteer named Jim Todd, a fisherman named Joe, and a photograph timestamped 6:34 p.m. have each put a piece of on the public record. And when you lay those pieces side by side, the picture they form does not look like an accident. Her last Instagram caption said, "Not going anywhere for a while." She had no idea. The evening at the Abaco Inn, Ken is 38 years old. He is from the Bahamas. He grew up on and around the waters of Elbow Cay and the Sea of Abaco. He has spent his life in those islands the way you spend your life in the place you are from. Not as a tourist, not as a visitor, not as someone passing through, but as a person for whom the geography is internal. The distances, the crossings, the way the water behaves in certain conditions at certain times of year. On the evening of April 4th, 2026, Ken was behind the bar at the Abaco Inn. It was a Saturday. The bar was full, a bohemian poolside bar on a warm Saturday evening in the Bahamas, the kind of crowd that moves fast and talks loud and keeps the staff moving without pause. The kind of evening where you get to someone, you take their order, you pour it, and you move to the next person. There is no time to linger. There is no space for extended conversation. Brian Hooker came to the bar for the first time at around 4:30 in the afternoon. 2 rum and cokes. He paid by card. He said very little. He took the drinks and went back to wherever his wife was by the pool. The interaction was ordinary in every detail. A man on a Saturday afternoon ordering a round for himself and his wife at a busy bar in the islands. Nothing flagged, nothing stood out. Ken moved to the next customer. Approximately 90 minutes later, Brian came back. The bar was even more crowded by then. Saturday evening had built into the kind of noise and movement that makes you grateful when the bartender gets to you quickly. Brian got to the bar and looked at Ken and said something that Ken has now put on the record by name. In the New York Post and on Fox News. He said, "Oh man, thank you for getting me served kind of quick." Ken nodded. He poured the drinks. He watched Brian go back toward the pool, and then he moved to the next customer. That was the last documented interaction Ken had with Brian Hooker before Lynette Hooker entered the water and did not come back. Here is what Ken observed across those 2.5 hours. He never saw Lynette directly. She had gone to the pool when Brian ordered the first round. She was not at the bar for either order. The only face Ken connected to that table, to that card, to those drinks was Brian's. And Brian, in Ken's professional assessment from behind a busy bar, was sober when he left, not noticeably impaired, functional. 2 drinks over 2.5 hours does not produce the kind of intoxication that changes a person's behavior in ways a bartender would notice. Well, Ken noticed nothing. Brian was polite. Brian was quiet. Brian was grateful for fast service. Ken described him the way you describe someone who left no impression, like a former soldier, quiet, composed. And then Ken went home at the end of his shift. And when he woke up the next morning and heard what had been reported from the water the night before, something in him did not sit right. Not because of anything Brian said or did at the bar, not because of how he looked or how he carried himself or anything behavioral, because of the math. Ken knows those waters. He knows those crossings. He knows what 4 miles looks like from a man in a small dinghy in the Sea of Abaco. And the number he heard, 8 to 10 hours, did not match anything in his knowledge of how that water works. We will come back to Ken's math, because it matters in a way that builds on everything else in this story. But first, there is a photograph taken by a man who had no reason to take it, at a time that puts the entire evening in a different frame. And it was taken at 6:34 p.m. The photograph at 6:34, Joe was at the Abaco Inn on the evening of April 4th, 2026. He was a fisherman. He had no connection to the hookers. He did not know who they were. He was not documenting them. He was not watching them. He was at the Abaco Inn the way people are at places on evenings when the light is good and the atmosphere is right, present, relaxed, unhurried. He was taking photographs for his mother. The waves, the atmosphere, the quality of the early evening light on the water at a bohemian poolside bar in the Bahamas on a warm Saturday. The kind of photographs that are not about anything specific. They're about the feeling of a place, captured to share with someone who is not there. Joe had no reason to document Brian and Lynette Hooker, and yet, in the background of one of those frames, caught without intention, without awareness, without any knowledge of what would happen in the hours that followed. There they are, Brian and Lynette Hooker at the pool of the Abaco Inn. The photograph is time-stamped 6:34 p.m. Investigative journalist Ashley Banfield and others who have reviewed this image have confirmed what it shows. Lynette Hooker is wearing a light green bathing suit cover-up, not a black 2-piece bathing suit. A green cover-up, worn over whatever she had on underneath, clearly visible in the frame. 6:34 p.m. Let that timestamp settle for a moment. 6:34 p.m. On April 4th, 2026, Lynette Hooker is at the pool of the Abaco Inn. She is alive. She is wearing a green cover-up. She is in the same place she has been for the past 2 hours while Brian ordered rounds at the bar. She does not know that a stranger is photographing the light. She does not know that her image is being captured in the background of a frame that will become, in the weeks that follow, one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the investigation into her disappearance. She is just at the pool, and then 4 minutes later, something the surveillance camera at the Elbow Inn captured changes the picture entirely. Lynette's daughter, Carly Ellsworth, and her boyfriend, Steve, reviewed the surveillance footage from the Elbow Inn. Carly told Ashley D. Banfield exactly what that footage showed. At approximately 6:38 p.m., 4 minutes after Joe's photograph was taken, Brian and Lynette Hooker were walking out of the Elbow Inn toward the dock, heading for the dinghy, heading for the water. 6:38 p.m. Now hold both of those times in your mind simultaneously. 6:34, the photograph. 6:38, the surveillance footage. Two independent records, 4 minutes apart, placing Brian and Lynette Hooker at the Elbow Inn and then walking toward the dock. Now at a third time, Brian Hooker told Bahamian authorities they left the Elbow Inn at approximately 7:30 p.m. Stop. 6:34. 6:38, 7:30. The gap between what the surveillance footage shows and what Brian told police is 52 minutes, not 5 minutes. Not the kind of discrepancy that comes from someone trying to remember whether they left at 7:10 or 7:20. Not an honest imprecision in the fog of a traumatic night. 52 minutes. And that 52 minutes does not sit alone in this case. It connects directly, and this is the part that matters, to the central pillar of Brian Hooker's explanation for why he could not locate his wife after she went into the water. Brian told authorities the conditions were rough. High winds, choppy seas, darkness falling fast. He said it was dark enough by the time Lynette went overboard that he lost sight of her. Darkness. That darkness is a load-bearing element of the explanation for why a former United States Marine could not locate his wife in the water near their dinghy. Without the darkness, the story requires different answers. And here is what a man named Jim Todd, who was on that island on that evening, who knows those waters, and who was one of the first people to encounter Brian Hooker the following morning, has put on the record about what the light was doing at 6:38 p.m. on April 4th, 2026, near Elbow Cay in the Bahamas. It was not dark. It was not dusk. It was full, clear, unambiguous daylight, and it would remain daylight for another 45 minutes to an hour. The 52-minute gap. Jim Todd is a volunteer with the Hopetown Fire and Rescue Service. He is a solid citizen on a small island where everyone knows each other and everyone says so. He is not a detective. He is not an investigator. He is a man who volunteers his time to help people in emergencies, and who was, by coincidence, at a restaurant near the water on the evening of April 4th with his wife and family. He arrived at that restaurant just before 7:30 p.m., and he has a specific, undocumented memory of what the conditions were like that evening. At approximately 7:30 to 7:45 p.m., Jim observed that the wind had kicked up to the point where it was unpleasant. It was getting dark. In his assessment, he would not have expected to see boats underway in those conditions. It was rough enough, in his view, that no boater should be out. Those conditions, the wind, the growing darkness, the rough water, are consistent with the conditions Brian described. Rough seas, strong winds, darkness. But those conditions existed at 7:30 p.m., not at 6:38 p.m. Jim Todd confirmed directly in his interview with Ashley Banfield that at 6:38 p.m. on April 4th, 2026, in those waters at that time of year, it was not darkness. It was not dusk. It was full daylight. And a 15-minute dinghy crossing from the Elbow Inn dock to where the Soulmate was anchored would have placed any incident at approximately 6:50 to 6:55 p.m., still in complete, unambiguous daylight. Now sit with what that means. If Brian and Lynette left the dock at 6:38, as the surveillance footage suggests, then the crossing to the Soulmate happened in daylight. Any incident that occurred on or near that crossing happened in daylight. The darkness that Brian cited as the reason he could not see his wife in the water, that darkness did not exist yet. And here is the question that the 52-minute gap produces. If the surveillance footage is accurate, if Brian and Lynette were walking toward the dock at 6:38, then where did they go for 52 minutes before Brian told police they departed? Is it possible the footage was misread? When Carly Ellsworth reviewed it directly, she gave a formal statement to police. The timestamp has been reported across multiple outlets without contradiction. Is it possible Brian's 7:30 estimate was an honest error? The kind of imprecision that comes from trauma and exhaustion and a long, disorienting night? Jim Todd initially allowed for that possibility. He initially assumed the confusion Brian showed on the rescue vessels the following morning was intoxication. A man who had been through something terrible, who had been drinking, who was exhausted. Then Jim learned that Brian had approximately 2 drinks over 2.5 hours. And Ken, the bartender who poured those drinks and who assessed Brian's state when he left the Abaco Inn, described him as sober, not impaired, functional, composed. So the explanation of intoxication did not hold. And a 52-minute error in a sober man's account of the most significant event of his life, the evening his wife disappeared, is not the kind of error that resolves easily. It sits there. It does not move. And it connects directly and unavoidably to the detail that Jim Todd has said, on the record, profoundly changed how he understood Brian Hooker's account of that night. Not the timestamps, not the math, not the anchor that was never deployed, or the life jacket that never entered the water. The green cover-up, the single most visible thing Lynette Hooker was wearing at 6:34 p.m., the thing that search and rescue never knew about, the green cover-up. When someone goes overboard, the clothing description is not a detail, it is the target. It goes into text messages immediately. But it goes to every team on the water, every person scanning the surface for any floating material, any patch of color, any shape that is not wave, is looking for what the clothing description told them to look for. The clothing description is what turns a search into a rescue instead of a recovery. In the hours after Lynette Hooker disappeared, search and rescue teams coordinated by text across the water near Elbow Cay. Jim Todd was one of the first people on the rescue vessel with Brian Hooker on the morning of April 5th. He asked Brian directly, standing on the bow of the fire and rescue boat, looking out at the water they were about to search, what Lynette was wearing when she went into the water. Brian's answer was consistent every time he was asked. A black 2-piece bathing suit. That is what the teams were looking for. A woman in a black 2-piece bathing suit. That description went into the text chains. That description went to every person scanning the water. Teams who were out there in the dark, in the early morning, in the growing light of April 5th, were looking for black fabric on dark water. Now, go back to the photograph. 6:34 p.m. April 4th, 2026. Lynette Hooker at the pool of the Abaco Inn. Lighted green bathing suit cover-up, clearly visible, worn over whatever she had on underneath. A green garment, the kind of color that floats, the kind of color that is visible from a distance, the kind of color that a search and rescue team with instructions to look for green would have prioritized in those waters. Brian never mentioned it, not to Jim Todd on the bow of the rescue boat, not to the search and rescue teams coordinating by text, but not in any statement that has made its way into the public record. The teams were looking for black. The photograph shows green. 4 minutes before the surveillance camera recorded them walking toward the dock, Lynette Hooker was wearing a green cover-up. She was wearing it when they left the Abaco Inn. Unless she removed it and left it somewhere between the pool and the dock, a detail that has not appeared in any account, she was wearing it when she got in the dinghy. She was wearing it when she went into the water. And Brian Hooker, who watched his wife go into the water, who was present for everything that happened on that dinghy on that crossing, who stood on the bow of a rescue vessel the following morning trying to help people find her, never once mentioned the green cover-up. Not once. Jim Todd, when he found out about the green cover-up, when Carly Ellsworth in the photograph and the surveillance footage made clear what Lynette had actually been wearing, said something directly to Ashley Banfield. It profoundly changed how he felt about Brian's story. Those are his words, not my characterization of his reaction, not an interpretation of what he seemed to mean. His words, on the record, profoundly changed. Because here is the thing about the green cover-up that makes it different from every other detail in this case. Every other anomaly, the 52 minutes, the 8 hours, the anchor, the life jacket, can be approached with an alternative explanation. Imprecision, panic, confusion, the disorientation of a terrible night. But the green cover-up is not a number that can be misremembered. It is not a timeline that can be imprecise. It is the most visible thing on the body of the person you are trying to find. If your wife goes overboard wearing green, green is the first word out of your mouth. Green goes to every team. Green is what you tell the person standing beside you on the rescue boat at dawn when they ask what she was wearing. Green does not get forgotten. Green does not get replaced by black. Not by a man who watched it happen. Not by a man who was trying to find her. And Jim Todd, who was there, who stood on that boat with Brian, who was one of the people coordinating the search, said that when he found out about the green cover-up, something in his understanding of Brian Hooker's account of that night changed in a way that could not be changed back. Profoundly changed. The investigation is active. Brian Hooker has not been charged. His attorney, was Terrell Butler, has stated categorically and unequivocally that Brian Hooker denies all wrongdoing. Those facts are in the record, and they are stated here clearly. But the green cover-up is also in the record, and it does not go away. Ken's math. 4 miles, 8 hours. Ken did not see anything suspicious about Brian Hooker, the man. This is important to say clearly and to say first, because what Ken has put on the record is sometimes framed as an accusation. It is not. Ken described Brian Hooker's behavior at the bar as ordinary, quiet, polite, grateful for fast service. The interaction of a man who gave no cause for concern, who left no impression beyond the ordinary, who paid by card and said thank you and walked back to the pool. What Ken is describing as weird, his word not mine, is not the man, it is the math. And the math begins with a specific geography. The incident that Brian Hooker described, Lynette going overboard from the dinghy, allegedly occurred near Elbow Cay. The Soulmate was anchored in those waters. The dinghy was the vessel they used to cross from the Abaco dock to the Soulmate. Brian Hooker arrived at the Marsh Harbor boatyard at approximately 4 a.m. on April 5th. The distance from where the alleged incident occurred near Elbow Cay to the Marsh Harbor boatyard, the distance Brian drifted or traveled or moved across in the hours between Lynette going overboard and him arriving at the boatyard, is 4 miles. Ken knows that distance. He has watched boats cross those waters his entire life. He knows what the currents do. He knows what the winds do. He knows how long it takes a vessel to cover 4 miles in the Sea of Abaco under a range of conditions. Calm, rough, with engine, without engine, drifting. He told Fox News directly, "It's only 4 miles that way. It shouldn't have taken 8 to 10 hours to get there. Even if he was only floating, it should have been a much quicker time. 4 miles, 8 to 10 hours. Ken called it weird. Now, Ken is not a maritime authority. He is not a forensic analyst or a naval engineer or a current specialist. He is a man from the Bahamas who has spent his entire life watching boats cross those specific waters in those specific conditions. His knowledge is not credentialed. It is lived.